Before I start, a word to the women watching. Last time I laid out what this system does to you, the shame, the purity thing, the way it protects the man and moves you along, the way the whole book seems to make you pay for what men did. I said what I had to say about that, and I meant every word of it. So you're welcome here. You always are, but I want to be honest with you about what today is. Today I'm talking to men, because a lot of what got done to you was done by men who never got taught how to be one. And I can't fix that by talking to you about it. I have to talk to them. So this one's a little bit different. Pour something if you want. You can listen in, but I'm turning the chair towards the guys. All right, fellas. We've looked at the logic, the psychology, today, the masculinity. And this one I know from the inside most of all, because this is the one I had to pull straight out of my own chest. So let me start with me. Not with them, me. For years, ask anyone who knows me, I could not stop talking about how a certain man, how he bullies, how he dominates every room he's in, how he always has to win, how he can never, ever admit he's wrong. It genuinely lit me up in maybe a little crazy. And one day, I'm meeting with my Jungian analyst, and he asks me, not even trying to be deep, looks at me and just asks, what is it about this guy that triggers you so much? And I had a quick answer ready, but the question stuck in me like a splinter, because right around then, my wife and I were in a rough stretch. We fought a lot, and here's the thing about me. I can win an argument. I can twist any situation until I'm the reasonable one, the one who did the right thing. Rachel would walk away from a fight feeling cornered, and I would walk away feeling right. And it landed on me, sitting there chewing on that guy's question, that exact thing that I could not stand in that man, the need to always be right, to never back down, to win instead of connect. I was doing it in my own house to the person I love most in the world. I wasn't better than that man I'd been raging about. I had the same engine. Mine just ran a little bit quieter. So I did the only thing that actually changes anything. I went home and I apologized to my wife, the real kind, and something moved because I stopped trying to win her and started trying to just reconnect with her. And I'm telling you, our fights resolve about, 10 minutes faster now. Turns out you can't win your way back to somebody, you can only come home to them. That's the shadow. And today we're going to talk about what happens to men when nobody ever teaches them how to look at it. And keep that same thing in the corner of your eye we've carried the whole way. The quiet awareness underneath all of this, the part of you just watching, already okay. That's the part of me that'll let me see myself that day. It's in you too right now. Here's the masculinity I got handed as a young man. Be hard, never cry, sleep with as many women as you can, be dominant, win, and whatever you do, don't be soft, don't be feminine, don't be gay. We literally made gay the insult. And then I got into religion, and it didn't heal that fear, it baptized it. And I'll be honest, and it's really hard to say, when I first got saved, I said the words, I hate gay people, about human beings who had never done one single thing to me. I'll tell you where I think that hatred comes from, because I lived inside it. The stuff we can't stand to see inside ourselves, we bury. And what we bury, we go hunting for in other people. That softness I was terrified of in me, I had to find it out there and attack it so I could prove it wasn't in here. The hate was never really about them. It was a scared kid trying to outrun his own shadow. And once you feel that engine in yourself, you start seeing it everywhere. How often the loudest voice against a thing turns out to be hiding the very thing it's screaming about. We talked about Ted Haggard last time. That's not an outlier, that's the mechanism. And I say that with grief, because that's not a monster. That's a man so terrified of his own shadow, he went to war with it. And the war landed on the people who never deserved it. I know that man. I was that man. And I'll tell you exactly when it broke. I ended up in a church in LA, in a Bible study, and there were people there from the LGBTQ community. And I'm going to be honest with you. My first thought was, this is not going to work. That's how deep the wiring went. But I stuck around and I got to know them, heard their stories, heard the way they talked about God, the depth and the realness of their faith, and it just dissolved. Everything I'd been handed about how you can't be gay and close to God couldn't survive actually knowing them. Because you can hate a category, you cannot hate a person you've actually sat with. The fear only works at a distance. Get close and it falls apart every single time. And here's the freedom on the other side of it. Today, I've got gay friends and it's just no big deal. There was a time that same closeness would have, intimidated me. Like, what if he hits on me? Now it's just, dude, if you're gay, you're gay. If you're not, cool. Nobody's in danger here. The terror I used to carry about them, it was one more thing of my own fear had me projecting outward. So where does this kind of man come from? I think you have to look at the God he's been handed, because a man becomes the God he worships. If your God is mainly the Old Testament patriarch, dominant, wrathful, demands submission, rules by fear, can't be questioned, wipes out whole cities when he's crossed, then of course a godly man becomes a small copy of that. Dominant, can't be wrong, demands submission at home, rules by fear, and calls it leadership. The masculinity is just the theology shrunk to fit in a living room. And that Old Testament world was brutal to women. Right in the text. We walked through that last time. Men collected wives and concubines like property, and when the punishment came for the men's sins, it was the women who got discarded for it. But here's the thing that ought to stop us cold. The same faith says God showed up in flesh and looked nothing like that patriarch. He didn't dominate. He knelt down and washed men's feet. He wept. He touched the untouchable. He called God Abba, Papa, that tender word. He served. So Christianity is actually holding two completely different pictures of God in its hand, the dominating king and the kneeling servant. And evangelical masculinity looked at those two and chose the king. The men who claimed to follow the foot washers somehow built the whole idea of manhood around the thing he came to overturn. And there's something else that got cropped out of the picture. We talk about God like he's only ever been male, but that's not what's in the book either. God is described as a mother hen gathering her chicks under her wings, as a woman tearing the house apart looking for a lost coin, as a mother in labor, as a mother nursing her child who could never forget the baby at her breast. That's all in there. So somebody decided which half of that picture to keep and which half to crop out of the frame. And here's the only question to ask about that. Who benefits from a God who only ever looks like the men already in charge? Now let me show you where the permission slip for all of this comes from. Because it's not culture, it's page 3. Go back to the garden, and I want you to actually watch the order things happen in, because I read this book for 15 years and never once even noticed it. Genesis 2. God gives the command about the tree. Don't eat from it. And God gives the command to the man. Then, several verses later, God makes the woman. Read that again. The instruction was given before she even existed. Eve never heard it from God. She got it secondhand from Adam. And you can actually see the fingerprints of that. When the serpent shows up and Eve repeats the rule back, she adds something that was never in it. She says, and we can't even touch it. God never said that. Nobody said that. That's what happens to a rule when it gets passed person to person instead of received directly. It picks things up along the way. The one guy in the garden who had it firsthand, he didn't relay it right. Then it gets worse. Genesis 3 verse 6. And this is the line everybody skips. It says she gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate. He was standing right there, the one person in the garden who heard the command straight from God, watching the whole thing unfold, and he says nothing. No correction, no warning, not one word. The moment God shows up, the woman you put here with me, she gave me the fruit. His very first act as a man is to blame her and to take a swing at God on the way out. So let's total that up. The man is given the instruction, he passes it on wrong, he stands there silent while she acts on his bad information, and then he blames her for it. That is the first example of male leadership in the entire book, and it's a failure every single step. And like we said last time, neither one of them even had the knowledge of good and evil yet to understand what they were doing. They were punished for a choice they didn't even have the equipment to make. So, which curse got remembered? Which one stuck to the wall for 3,000 years? Pain in childbirth, and your husband will rule over you. Not his, hers. To this day, walk into most churches in the country and ask, whose fault was the fall? And you will hear her name. 3,000 years of blame for a rule she was never in the room to hear. Sit with that for a second, because it matters more than most anything else I'll say today. The idea that women belong under male authority isn't some cultural thing that crept in later and we can blame on the Greeks or the Romans. It got written into the story as God's own punishment. In the first 3 pages of the Bible, the foundation the whole house got built on. And once it becomes God's idea, it stops being a preference a man has to defend. It becomes an order he gets to enforce. And here's the human thing underneath it. The thing you've watched me do to myself the whole video. The parts of ourselves that we can't stand to face, we hand to someone else to carry. Eve became the place men could set down everything they didn't want to own. The weakness, the desire, the body, the shame. Put it all on her. and you never have to look at it in yourself. And you don't have to dig around in ancient history to still see it running. Watch what godly masculinity actually looks like now. When it gets a microphone, I'm not gonna just characterize it, I'm going to show you. Watch this.
And if I'm going to say anything, there's only one person more incredible than the Incredible Hulk, and that's my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ.
A few moments later.
Michelle Obama is a man.
That's it. That's the whole clip. Jesus, Trump, and a cruel lie about a black woman in one breath on the White House lawn with the president in the front row. I don't even have a thing to add. That's what we're calling godly manhood now. And here's a tell from the other direction. Right now, the evangelical world is buzzing about Joe Rogan, biggest podcaster alive, basically the face of the whole manosphere, has been openly fascinated with Jesus, talking about it episode after episode, and Christians are lighting up. Rogan's about to get saved. I know that excitement from the inside, you know, the Christian celebrity watch, where somebody famous gets close and everybody points like it's going to prove something. But just sit with that. Why do we need to do that? If the thing is true, it's true whether or not a famous man co-signs it. Truth doesn't get more true with a celebrity endorsement. So what's the excitement actually about? It's insecurity wearing the mask of celebration. And notice who it is. Not just any celebrity. It's the alpha, the strongest man in the room. Because if he validates, then maybe the fearful, dominant masculinity we built the whole thing on is finally proven right. That's not evangelism. That's a frightened faith looking for the biggest man on the playground to tell it it's okay. And it's not just the fighters. Ken Paxton, Texas Attorney General, ran an ad calling his opponent a soft-spoken seminarian. Too low T for Texas. Not man enough. Too gentle. That's the pitch. I'm the strong one. He's the weak one. Now hold this next to it. That same man's office, Ken Paxton's, they took a case against a lawyer charged with repeatedly sexually abusing a young boy, a charge that carried up to life in prison, and his office brokered a plea deal where the man admitted molesting the child and served only 30 days. Didn't even have to register as a sex offender. So hold those two things at once. The loudest voice about who's a real man, mocking a gentle Christian for being too soft, is the one whose office let a man who admitted to molesting a boy walk in a month. That's the tell every single time. The performance of strength on the outside is almost always covering up something rotting in the inside. There's a pastor named Dale Partridge. Big platform, and I'll be honest with you, this one's personal. I used to go to church with this guy. He's writing a book called 19 Reasons to Repeal the 19th Amendment, the one that gave women the right to vote. He said out loud that the majority of women are not capable of responsible voting, that a wife should vote the way her husband tells her to, that women should stop wearing leggings because of what it does to men, and his own wife cleared them out of her closet. I'm not here just to point and laugh. I want to ask the shadow question. What is this man so afraid of that he needs half of the human race to sit down and be quiet? Jesus never once told a woman to be subservient to man. Not one time. There's no verse where Jesus tells a woman to submit, to stay silent, to go under male authority. Read the gospel straight through, cover to cover. It isn't in there. What's in there is actually the opposite. He talked to women in public when alone that was a scandal. He let one sit at his feet in the disciple posture. He defended them. And when he came back from the dead, the hinge of the entire faith, he showed himself to a woman first. In a world where a woman's word didn't even count as testimony in court. So where does all the submission theology actually come from? Not from Jesus. It comes from a selective reading of the letters that came after. Letters written to specific churches with specific messes in specific cities that somehow got lifted up to outrate the words of Jesus himself. And here's what gets left out of that reading. The same writer people quote to silence women also wrote that in Christ there is neither male nor female. He worked side by side with women he called co-workers and leaders. He named a woman as outstanding among the apostles. The text is a whole lot bigger than the doctrine somebody built on top of it. Somebody went in with scissors and they kept the verses that put them in charge. And remember that pastor I told you about, Dale Partridge, the one writing the book to repeal the 19th Amendment? Here's the part I skipped. I remember that guy before the collar. And now he wears it, the little white collar, the uniform of religious authority. He took his own fear of women and put a collar on it and started calling it the will of God. And I'm not here to just point and laugh at him. I want to ask the shadow question, the same one I had to ask myself. What is a man so afraid of he needs half of the human race to sit down and be quiet? Because here's the thing about all of this. If men doing the interpreting are the same men who benefit from the interpretation, that's not theology. That's a conflict of interest in a collar. Here's that part that should really stop them. That same book, the one they wave around, is full of men they'd never let through the door today. Take David, again, warrior king, giant killer. So let's talk about his best friend, Jonathan. The text says their souls were knit together, that David loved him as his own soul, that they wept together and they kissed. And when Jonathan dies, David writes him a song, and the line is, "Your love to me was more wonderful than the love of a woman." The most celebrated man in the Old Testament showing up tender like that today, weeping over another man, writing him poetry. The same church that idolizes him would tell him to man up. Their definition of manhood would bench their own hero. And it's not just David. Look at what Jesus actually did. Wept in public, let a man lean on his chest at dinner, knelt and washed men's feet, said the strong move is to turn the other cheek, and the greatest thing a man can do is lay down his life. If a man did all that today, gentle, tender, weeping, nonviolent, you know exactly what they'd call him? The masculinity they're policing would have excommunicated Jesus. And listen, this was never about anyone's sexuality. The point is, we took God's own gentleness and called it weakness. Remember the Marine I told you about last time, the one who felt the evil coming off a worship leader he thought was too feminine, a man he'd never met? He wasn't looking at that man. He was looking at the gentleness in himself he was never allowed to have. So how did we end up with so many men stuck in the frightened, dominating version? Here's a piece almost nobody talks about. Every healthy culture in human history had a rite of passage, a moment where the boy was taken out by men, tested, initiated, and brought back changed. Now you're a man. And here's what that means. You protect, you provide, you carry your weight, and you master yourself. We threw that away. We don't initiate our boys anymore, so they're left trying to figure out manhood from the internet, from the strongman, from the loudest angry voice in the feed. And an uninitiated man doesn't disappear. He just spends his whole life performing in manhood he was never actually walked into. Now, look at how Jesus himself got initiated, because it's right there and nobody talks about it. He goes down into the river, he comes up, the sky tears open, and a voice says, "This is my son who I love, and I am well pleased with him." And notice when that happens, before a single miracle, before any sermon, before he has done one thing that anybody could put on a resume, he is standing there soaking wet, having accomplished nothing, and he is named beloved. Named enough. And only does then the Spirit lead him out into the wilderness to be tested. Sit with that order, guys. Identity first, the trial second. He doesn't earn his belovedness by surviving the desert. He walks into the desert already knowing exactly who he is, and that's the one thing the desert could not take away from him. Now compare that to what most of us got handed. We got the opposite order. Prove yourself, produce, perform, win, and maybe someday you'll have earned the right to feel like you're enough. Some men march straight out into the wilderness with nothing underneath them. And a lot of them never come back out because there's no voice down there telling them who they already are. And when a man never got told he was enough, he will spend the rest of his life trying to wring that feeling out of the world some other way. Dominance, conquest, winning every argument, making sure everybody in the room stays a little smaller. That's not a villain. That's a wound with a man wrapped around it. And I know that from the inside because I was one of them, an uninitiated boy in a grown body, still trying to prove it. And I didn't find the way out in an argument. I found it in the woods. I found mine late. A few years back, I got seriously sick. Mold toxicity. The darkest stretch of my life, my own dark night of the soul. And somewhere in the middle of that, I found a men's contemplative community called Illumin. And I flew out to West Virginia for their rites of passage. Went in sick and broken, and for the first time in my adult life, a circle of men looked at me and said, "We see you. You're enough." I didn't know how starved I'd been for that until somebody finally said it out loud. But the moment I actually want to tell you about happened in one of the meetings. Illumin has a Spanish-speaking side, and there was this older man, a Mexican man, maybe in his 70s, who had been in the work for a while, and he just started crying. And what he said honestly gutted me. He said, "I just wish I had found this 30 years ago. I could have connected with my daughters back then the way I finally am learning to now." And I sat there and wept because I was looking at the whole tragedy In one man, nobody ever gave him the door to his own softness. He spent decades as the strong, silent provider, and it cost him the closeness with his own kids. And he found the path at 70. That's what the script does to men. It doesn't just make them hard, it quietly robs them of the people they love most and calls it strength. And that was the closest I'd come to God in a long time. Not a doctrine, not a belief I signed off on, a thing I felt in my body around a fire, fully seen and not turned away. Turns out the divine was never only in the sanctuary. Sometimes it's in the dirt and the tears, the being known. That was my initiation. I just had to wait 30 some years for somebody to finally give me one. And it's not only the wilderness that softened me, it was home. Having a strong, powerful wife and then 2 little daughters, that did something to me that no argument ever could. I grew an empathy in me I genuinely didn't have before for women, for what they carry, for the whole journey I used to be blind to. That old man in the meeting was crying about the daughters he had almost missed. I get to not miss mine. That's the gift. That's what being a whole man actually bought me. One honest thing about Illumin, that program I just talked about, if I'm being honest about everything else, right now, those rooms are mostly older white men. And part of me wishes for way more diversity in there. I'd really love to see it, but here's the strange hope in it. The men who've held the power the longest, the ones the whole fearful system was built to protect, those are the men I'm watching sit in a circle and weep and get soft and human again. If even they can be initiated back into their own hearts, then nobody's too far gone. Not one of us. So here's where all of it lands. A man raised in fear, taught to dominate, to win, to never be soft, to worship a king-shaped God and become a small copy of him. That man is going to be drawn to a certain kind of leader. One who never admits he's wrong, who dominates every room, who calls cruelty strength and tenderness weakness. He won't feel like a betrayal of the faith. He'll feel like the guy we were all raised to become. That's the masculinity that built a king. But I've been that scared man, and I'm telling you from the other side, the strong man was never strong. Real strength was the thing I found in the woods. The courage to be soft, to be wrong, to apologize to my wife, to weep in front of other men and not die of it. Maybe that's what actually is trying to be born out of all of this. Not a tougher faith, a whole one. A masculinity with nothing left to prove because it's finally got nothing left to hide. Fear builds a strong man. Love builds a whole man. And I know which one I want my daughters to marry someday and which one I want to be for them right now. Next time, the finale, where all of this has been heading and who it's been about the whole time. I'm Kyle. This is Meticulous Universe. I pray you have the courage to pull that thread.